Kyle Vanett wiped grease from his hands with a shop rag, the familiar weight of his wrench still warm in his palm. The heater unit in front of him had been fighting him for 2 hours, but he'd won. He always did. Outside his small workshop, rain drummed against the metal roof in the steady rhythm that defined Astoria mornings. The workshop smelled of motor oil and metal shavings. Tools hung in precise rows on pegboard walls, wrenches arranged by size, screwdrivers sorted by type, everything exactly where it belonged. Kyle had learned organization in the Marines, but he'd perfected it here in this 10 by 12 space behind their house. Everything had its place. Everything made sense here. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, sitting forgotten on the workbench next to a carburetor he'd rebuilt 3 times until it was perfect. Kyle didn't mind cold coffee. He minded things that didn't work properly. His phone buzzed against the metal surface. Kaylee. Kira's feeling sick. Her voice carried that edge it got when she was stressed. Nausea, maybe a fever. I'm taking her to the ER. Kyle set down his wrench and checked the time. 8:30 a.m. What kind of nausea? Did she eat something bad? I don't know, Kyle. She just said her stomach hurt and she looked pale. Kaylee's words came faster than usual. I'm already getting her ready. I'll come with you. Kyle was already reaching for his jacket. Kira rarely got sick, and when she did, it was usually nothing serious. But the hospital was no place for a 13-year-old to be alone. Just let me handle this, please. The words came out sharp, cutting. Stay with work. You always do. Kyle's hand froze on his jacket. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just, I can handle this myself. Something twisted in Kyle's gut. Not the words themselves, but the way she said them. Like she'd been rehearsing. Like she'd been waiting for the right moment to use them. Kaylee, what's really going on? I have to go. Kira's waiting in the car. The line went dead. Kyle stared at his phone, the black screen reflecting his own confused expression. 13 years of marriage had taught him to read Kaylee's moods like weather patterns. Her anger when dinner was late. Her frustration when bills came due. Her restlessness during long winter months when Astoria felt more like a prison than a home. But this wasn't any of those familiar storms. This was something else entirely. He tried calling back. Straight to voicemail. The workshop felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a trap. Kyle picked up his wrench, then set it down again. His hands were steady, they always were, but his mind wasn't. He'd learned in the Marines to trust his instincts, to pay attention when something felt wrong. Right now, they were screaming at him, but he didn't follow them. He let his wife take their daughter to the hospital alone, that he went back to work instead, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of repair and maintenance. But every few minutes, he found himself checking his phone. No messages. No missed calls to BY noon. The worry had settled into his bones like winter cold, BY 6 p.m. Kyle's text had gone unanswered for nearly 10 hours. How's Kira? Call me back. Where are you? This isn't funny anymore. He'd sent the last one an hour ago, when worry had started turning into something harder. Kyle didn't get scared. Easily 3 tours in Afghanistan had beaten most fear out of him, but this was different. This was his family, that he called Astoria General. The receptionist's voice was bored, professional. No record of Kira Vanett being admitted today. Kyle's hand tightened on the phone. Check again. My wife brought her in this morning. Sir, I've checked our system twice. No one by that name has been seen in our emergency department today. What about urgent care? Maybe they went there instead. We only have record for the ER, sir. You might want to try other facilities. Kyle hung up and immediately called the urgent care clinic across town. Nothing. He tried a medical center in Seaside, 20 miles up the coast. Nothing. The workshop suddenly felt like a cage. Kyle grabbed his keys and drove to Astoria General anyway. He walked every hall, checked the emergency room, talked to 3 different nurses. All of them gave him the same answer. No record of Kira Vanett. No record of Kaylee Vanett. At 8 p.m., he called Sheriff Mel Waller. They'd known each other since high school, back when Waller was just another kid getting drunk on the beach, and Kyle was the quarterback everyone expected to leave town and never come back. My wife and daughter are missing. Waller's sigh came through the phone, clear as day. Kyle, how long they been gone? Since this morning. Kaylee said she was taking Kira to the ER for nausea. Hospital has no record of them. Could be they went to Portland. Bigger hospital. Better doctors. Then why isn't she answering her phone? Why didn't she tell me they were going to Portland? Look, I'll make some calls. Check with the hospitals up there. But unless there's signs of foul play. Waller trailed off, but Kyle knew what he meant. Wives left husbands all the time. Usually they took the kids. This isn't what you think. Kyle, I gotta ask. You and Kaylee been having problems? Kyle thought about the question seriously. Had they been having problems? Kaylee had been restless lately, talking more about traveling, about seeing the world beyond Astoria's gray skies and endless rain. She'd mentioned Portland a few times, wondered out loud what it would be like to live in a real city. But problems? Real problems? No, he said finally. Nothing that would make her run. I'll make some calls, Waller said again. But Kyle, sometimes people surprise us. Kyle hung up and drove home to an empty house. The silence hit him like a physical force. No TV playing in the living room. No music from Kira's bedroom. No sound of Kaylee moving around the kitchen, preparing dinner. He checked Kira's room first. Her backpack was gone from its usual spot by her desk. Her favorite book, a dog-eared copy of The Giver she'd read at least 5 times, was missing from her nightstand. But everything else looked normal. Too normal. Kyle checked Kaylee's closet next. Half her clothes were missing, but not randomly. Her favorite jeans were gone, along with her good boots and the jacket she always wore when it rained. The suitcase they'd bought for their honeymoon was missing from the top shelf. The silence pressed against his ears like deep water, threatening to drown him where he stood. 3 days later, Waller called. Kyle was in his workshop, pretending to work when the phone rang. Found Kaylee's car. Kyle's hands went cold. Where? Bottom of the marina. 60 feet down near the pier. Divers pulled it up this morning. Waller paused, and Kyle could hear voices in the background. Doors were closed. No bodies inside. The phone nearly slipped from Kyle's grip. What are you saying? I'm saying we're treating this as a potential drowning. Could be they got out before the car went under. Could be the current carried them out to sea. Divers are searching, but Kyle, it's been 3 days. If they're in the water. Kyle didn't hear the rest. The world had narrowed to a single point of pain behind his eyes. His wife and daughter were dead, drowned in the cold waters of the Columbia River while he was fixing heaters and worrying about unanswered text messages. Kyle, you still there? Yeah. His voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. Yeah, I'm here. I need you to come down to the station. We got some paperwork to fill out. And Kyle? I'm sorry. Kyle sat in his living room at 2 a.m., staring at Kaylee's laptop. The police had cleared it after finding nothing obvious, but Kyle knew computers from his mechanic work. Modern cars were more computer than engine these days, and he'd learned to read diagnostic codes like a second language. The main user profile had been deleted, but fragments remained. Email chains with gaps where messages had been removed. Browser history wiped clean except for one entry that made Kyle's blood turn cold. International custody laws. He ran recovery software, the kind used to pull data from damaged hard drives. Slowly, piece by piece, deleted files began to emerge from the digital graveyard. His sister Raina found him there at midnight the next day, still hunched over the screen, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pages of printed emails. Kyle, she set a hand on his shoulder, and he could feel how thin he'd gotten in just 4 days. You need to sleep. Look at this. He pointed at a recovered email fragment on the screen. The sender's address was blocked, but part of the message remained. Final step. Once it's done, we disappear. Raina leaned closer, her EMT training automatically cataloging the signs of exhaustion in her brother's face. The red-rimmed eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way he kept checking his phone even though no one was going to call. This could mean anything, Kyle. Look at the date. Kyle's finger traced the timestamp. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before they disappeared. Raina studied the screen, then pulled up a chair. She'd known Kyle his entire life, had watched him survive their father's death and their mother's slow retreat into alcohol and depression. He was the strongest person she knew, but everyone had a breaking point. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I should have told you before. Kaylee called me 2 months ago, asked how hard it would be to leave the country with a minor. Kyle's hands stilled on the keyboard. When he turned to look at his sister, his eyes were completely flat. What exactly did she ask? Legal requirements. Documentation. Whether a parent could take a child overseas without the other parent's permission. Raina's voice was steady, but Kyle caught the anger underneath. The guilt. She said she was asking for a friend. Someone in an abusive relationship. What did you tell her? The truth. That it's complicated. That there are legal hoops to jump through. Raina met his eyes directly. I should have told you then, Kyle. I knew something was off about the way she asked. Kyle turned back to the laptop. More files were appearing as the recovery software worked. Financial records, travel websites, research on non-extradition countries. She was planning this, he said, his voice empty of emotion. For months. Kyle. She took my daughter and faked her own death. He closed the laptop with careful precision, the same way he set down tools when a job was finished. That's not panic. That's not running from an abusive husband. That's premeditation. Raina watched her brother's face harden into something she'd seen before, during the worst days after their father's funeral. Kyle grieving was one thing. Kyle angry was something else entirely. What are you going to do? Kyle stood up, stretching muscles that had been locked in place for hours. Find them. The police. The police think they're dead. Kyle walked to the window, looking out at the empty street. They're not looking for two people who don't want to be found. They're looking for bodies. And if you find them, Kyle's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Then I bring my daughter home. Tanner met Kyle at the docks before dawn, when the fog was still thick enough to hide them from casual observers. They'd served together in the Marines, back when the world made more sense and enemies wore uniforms. Now Tanner worked harbor patrol and owed Kyle more favors than either man could count. You sure you want to know this? Tanner's breath made white clouds in the cold air. He was holding a tablet, but keeping it close to his chest like he didn't want to let it go. Tell me. Tanner looked out at the water, where Kaylee's car had been pulled up 3 days ago. The harbor was quiet except for the sound of waves against the docks and the distant cry of seagulls. Ferry logs show no record of Kaylee or Kira boarding any scheduled transport. I checked every line that runs between here and Seattle. He paused. But I also checked the private charters. Kyle's chest tightened, and I checked the CCTV from the marina. Tanner handed Kyle the tablet reluctantly. Look at this timestamp. The black and white footage was grainy, but clear enough. Two figures walking toward a charter fishing boat. One tall and confident, one smaller and staying close. Both carrying luggage that looked too heavy for a quick trip to the hospital. Kyle's chest felt like someone had punched a hole through it. That's them. The tall one walks like Kaylee. Same stride, same way of holding her shoulders. Tanner pointed at the screen. The smaller one, that's got to be Kira. Kyle watched the footage again, studying every detail. Kaylee moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. But there was something wrong with Kira's posture. She stayed too close to her mother, kept looking around like she was afraid of something. What about the boat? Belongs to Rick Carver. Does charter fishing, but also side work for cash. No questions asked, no paperwork required. Tanner's voice was carefully neutral. The timestamp is 27 minutes before your wife's car hit the water. Kyle felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. 27 minutes. Long enough to get on the boat. Long enough to get clear of the harbor. Long enough to be safely away when her car took its final plunge into the Columbia River. You gonna tell Waller? Tanner asked. Kyle handed back the tablet. Not yet. Kyle, this is evidence. Real evidence that they're alive. Evidence of what? That my wife took our daughter on a boat ride. Kyle turned toward his truck. Waller would say they could have fallen overboard. Accident during a charter fishing trip. But you know better. Kyle stopped walking. In the growing light, Tanner could see the exhaustion in his friend's face, but something else too. Something that reminded him of Kyle in combat. When the mission was everything and personal feelings were a luxury they couldn't afford. She wanted me to think they were dead, Kyle said quietly. She wanted me to grieve them, bury them, move on with my life while she started over somewhere else with my daughter. What are you going to do? Kyle climbed into his truck and rolled down the window. Find them. Bring Kira home. And Kaylee. Kyle's expression didn't change. Kaylee made her choice. Kyle's savings account balance showed $347. Last week, it had held $18,000 money he'd saved over 5 years, planning to buy Kira a car when she turned 16, that he sat in First National's lobby, staring at printed statements while his account manager shuffled papers nervously. The woman was young, probably fresh out of college, and clearly uncomfortable dealing with what looked like a domestic dispute. The withdrawal was authorized with proper signatures, she said for the third time. Electronic transfer to a shell company called Meridian Holdings. I never authorized any transfer. Kyle kept his voice level, but he could see the manager flinch anyway. The digital signature matches your wife's signature on file. She's listed as a joint account holder with full access. Kyle studied the paperwork spread across the small table. Kaylee's signature was there, perfect down to the small flourish on the K that she developed in college. But the account number for Meridian Holdings was nothing he recognized. This shell company. You have any information about it? I can't release details about other accounts, sir. Privacy regulations. Kyle folded the papers carefully and stood up. Thank you for your time. His phone rang before he reached the parking lot. Judge Corbin Dree. Kyle, I heard about Kaylee and Kira from Mel Waller. I'm sorry for your loss. Judge Dree had been Kyle's father's friend, back when the old man was still alive and the Vannet name still meant something in Astoria. Now Dree was one of the few people in town who remembered Kyle as more than just another ex-Marine who couldn't adjust to civilian life. They're not dead, Judge. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, come to my office. Now, Dree's chambers smelled like old books and expensive coffee. The walls were lined with law volumes and framed photographs of the judge with politicians Kyle didn't recognize. Dree poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that probably cost more than Kyle made in a month. Tell me everything. Kyle laid out the evidence methodically. The CCTV footage from the marina, the missing money, the deleted computer files, the browser history showing research into international custody laws. Dree listened without interruption, his face growing harder with each detail. You're talking about kidnapping and fraud, Dree said when Kyle finished. I'm talking about theft. She stole my daughter and $18,000. Dree picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. I know people who can dig deeper into these financial records. Quietly, unofficially. What kind of people? The kind who understand that sometimes the law moves too slowly for justice. Dree's voice was steady, but Kyle caught the edge underneath. Give me 48 hours. The call came at midnight 2 days later. Kyle was in his workshop, pretending to rebuild an engine while actually staring at the wall and thinking about his daughter sleeping in some stranger's house. Kaylee opened a second bank account 3 months ago. Dree's voice was tight with controlled anger. Name of Melissa Caro. The Meridian Holdings account traces back to a logistics company in Portland. Kyle wrote down the address on the back of an oil change receipt. Company name? Moran Shipping Solutions. CEO is Chase Moran. Dree paused. Kyle, the money trail goes deeper than just your savings account. This Moran character has been moving significant funds through shell companies for months. Kyle had never heard the name Chase Moran before, but he committed it to memory along with everything else. The address, the company name, the way Dree's voice changed when he said it, like the name tasted bad. What else? Credit card records show charges for fake identification documents. High-quality stuff, not something you'd get from a street corner operation. Dree's voice dropped lower. Kyle, your wife has been planning this for at least 6 months. Maybe longer. Kyle set down his pen and looked around his workshop. Everything in its place. Everything logical and orderly and predictable. Nothing like the chaos his life had become. Judge, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. When I find them, and I will find them, what happens next? Dree was quiet for a long moment. Officially? You call the police and let the legal system handle it. And unofficially? You do whatever you have to do to bring your daughter home. Kyle found the voice recordings on an old phone hidden in Kaylee's jewelry box, wrapped in a silk scarf like something precious. The phone was a cheap prepaid model, the kind people bought when they didn't want their calls traced. His hands shook as he scrolled through the audio files. Dozens of them, spanning 3 months. All conversations between Kaylee and Kira. He pressed play on the first one. Your father doesn't understand you like I do. Kaylee's voice was soft, sympathetic. the tone she used when Kira was upset about something. He's so focused on control, on making you fit his idea of what you should be. Kira's voice came through smaller, uncertain. But he loves me. Of course he loves you, sweetheart. But love can be controlling. Remember when he made you quit piano because you missed that one recital? Remember how angry he got when you talked back to him last month? Kyle remembered those moments differently. Kira had missed a recital because she'd chosen to go to a friend's birthday party instead, after promising she'd be at the piano competition. He'd been disappointed, yes, but he'd also told her that commitments mattered, that people were counting on her. And the talking back incident, Kira had called him a stupid ass when he grounded her for staying out past curfew. He'd extended her punishment and made her apologize. Normal parent things. But in Kaylee's voice, they became something sinister. I think sometimes your father sees you as property, not a person. Like something he owns instead of someone he loves. Kyle's hands clenched into fists. He could hear Kira starting to cry in the recording. What should I do, Mom? Nothing right now, baby. Just remember that I'll always protect you, even from people who are supposed to love you. The recording continued for another 15 minutes. Kaylee's voice, patient and loving, slowly poisoning his daughter against him, using real moments, real mistakes that every parent made, and twisting them into evidence of something darker. Kyle played the next recording, then the next. A methodical campaign of psychological manipulation spread across months. Kaylee teaching Kira to be afraid of her own father. By the time he reached the final recording, Kira was completely convinced that Kyle was dangerous. When are we going to leave? She asked, her voice small and scared. Soon, baby, when the time is right. But remember, this has to be our secret. If your father finds out we're planning to leave, he might try to stop us. He might hurt us. I'm scared, Mom. I know, sweetheart, but I promise I'll keep you safe. Even if it means we have to go far away and never come back. Kyle sat in his empty kitchen, listening to his wife destroy his relationship with his daughter, one careful word at a time. The pain was physical, like something tearing inside his chest. But underneath the pain was something colder. Something that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours and the death of half his squad. Kaylee had made a crucial mistake. She'd kept evidence of her own crime. Kyle ejected the memory card from the phone and slipped it into his wallet. Evidence. Proof that Kira hadn't left willingly, that she'd been manipulated and lied to by the one person she should have been able to trust completely. He pulled out his own phone and called Raina. I know what happened, he said when she answered. I know how she did it. Kyle found Chase Moran in the parking garage beneath his office building. He'd been watching the man for 2 days, learning his routine. Moran left work every evening at exactly 6:30, took the elevator to the 3rd level of the garage, and drove home in a silver BMW that probably cost more than Kyle made in 2 years. Tonight, Kyle was waiting between the BMW and a concrete pillar. Chase Moran. The man spun around, startled. He was exactly what Kyle had expected: expensive suit, soft hands, the kind of confidence that came from never being truly threatened. Maybe 45 years old, with the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors. Who are you? Moran's voice cracked slightly, but he tried to cover it with aggressive posturing. This is private property. You can't be here. Kyle Vanett. I believe you know my wife. Chase's face went pale so fast Kyle thought he might faint. The man's eyes darted around the empty garage like he was looking for security cameras or escape routes. I don't know what you're talking about. Kyle pulled out a manila folder and set it on the hood of the BMW with deliberate care. Fake passports. Melissa Caro and Kira Caro. Your company chartered the boat that helped them disappear. Chase's hands were shaking now, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Look, whatever you think happened. Bank records showing payment from your personal account to Rick Carver for charter services. Kyle opened the folder and spread papers across the car's hood. Digital trail connecting your company servers to the Meridian Holdings shell company. Phone records showing 17 calls between your office and my wife's burner phone. I didn't know she was married. The words came out in a rush. She told me she was running from an abusive ex-boyfriend. She said she needed help protecting her daughter. Kyle stepped closer. Chase stumbled backward against his car, his keys falling from nerveless fingers. She showed me pictures. Chase continued desperately. Bruises on her arms. Said you'd been hitting her for years. Kyle thought of the voice recordings, of the months of manipulation Kaylee had put Kira through. Creating a false narrative was apparently her specialty. I'm not going to the police, Kyle said quietly. Yet, what do you want? Nothing from you. You're small. Pathetic. Kyle gathered up the papers and slipped them back into the folder. But I'm coming for her, and I know where your money sleeps. Chase's legs nearly gave out. He slid down the side of his car until he was sitting on the concrete, his expensive suit crumpling around him. She said she loved me, he whispered. Kyle looked down at the broken man with something approaching pity. She lied about that too. What happens now? Kyle started walking toward the stairwell. That depends on you. When this all falls apart, and you can choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution. He left Chase Moran sitting on the floor of a parking garage, surrounded by the wreckage of his own stupidity. Raina found the safety deposit box key taped under Kaylee's jewelry box, hidden behind a photograph of Kyle and Kira at last year's father-daughter fishing trip. The box itself was registered to both Kaylee and Kyle, but Kyle had never known it existed. They drove to the bank together, Kyle's hands steady on the wheel, while Raina studied the small brass key. You know what we're going to find in there, don't you? She said. Kyle kept his eyes on the road. Evidence. More lies. Maybe the truth about how long she's been planning this. The safety deposit box was smaller than Kyle had expected, but contained enough documents to fill 2 manila envelopes. Raina spread them across the bank's small viewing table while Kyle read over her shoulder. Custody transfer papers, notarized and official-looking. Signed with Kyle's forged signature, relinquishing all parental rights to Kira. Dated 6 months ago, Kyle's vision went red around the edges. She forged my signature. Look at this. Raina held up another document. Medical records, also forged, claiming Kyle had a history of violent behavior and substance abuse. Hospital visits for injuries that had never happened. Police reports for domestic disturbances that had never been filed. She was building a legal case, Raina said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Making it look like you abandoned Kira voluntarily, then documenting a pattern of abuse to justify taking her away. Kyle studied the forged signature on the custody papers. It was perfect, identical to his real signature down to the way he crossed his T's. Kaylee must have practiced for weeks. There's more. Character witness statements from people Kyle had never met, describing him as unstable and dangerous. A psychological evaluation from a doctor Kyle had never seen, declaring him unfit for custody. Even photographs, pictures of bruises on someone's arms that were supposed to be evidence of his violence. She created an entire false narrative, Kyle said. The papers crumpled in his grip before he forced himself to let go. She was going to destroy me. Raina gathered the documents carefully, her EMT training helping her stay calm in crisis situations. Kyle, this is evidence. Real evidence of fraud and kidnapping. It's not enough. Kyle's voice was steel. She's had months to establish herself wherever she went. By now, she has documentation, maybe even legal protection in whatever country she chose. I need to find them first before she can use any of this. And then what? Kyle looked at his sister, seeing the same hardness in her eyes that had carried their family through their father's death, their mother's slow decline, all the ways life had tried to break them. Then I take my daughter back, and I make sure Kaylee never gets the chance to hurt her again. Raina nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. What do you need me to do? Help me find them. The call came from Judge Dree at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, jerking Kyle awake from the first real sleep he'd had in a week. A customs officer in Seattle flagged an ID under the name Melissa Caro. She was traveling with a minor dependent. Destination Costa Rica. Kyle was already reaching for his clothes, the phone cradled against his shoulder. Yesterday afternoon. But here's the interesting part, they never made it onto their connecting flight. There was a temporary hold on their documents. Some kind of system glitch in the passport verification. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs, so hard he thought it might burst. Where are they now? Detained, pending verification of their documentation. Kyle, I got a contact in Costa Rica. A lawyer named Fernando Ruiz who owes me favors from a case we worked together 5 years ago. But you need to move fast. Kyle was already grabbing his passport from the desk drawer, checking his wallet for his credit cards. How fast? If their documentation gets approved, they'll be released and free to disappear into Costa Rica. No extradition treaty with the United States for nonviolent crimes. Dree's voice was urgent. You have maybe 48 hours before they're gone forever. Kyle threw clothes into a duffel bag, his mind already shifting into mission mode. Text me the lawyer's contact information. I'll be on the next flight out. Kyle, you need to understand what you're walking into. Costa Rica's legal system is complex, and if Kaylee has the forged custody documents with her, she can claim I have no legal right to Kira. Exactly. And if she's established any kind of paper trail showing abuse, then I'm the bad guy trying to kidnap his own daughter. Kyle zipped up his bag and headed for the door. Judge, I'm not leaving my daughter in a foreign country with a woman who's been lying to her for months. I know. That's why I'm helping. But Kyle, be careful. If this goes wrong, you could end up in a Costa Rican prison. The flight to Costa Rica felt like the longest 8 hours of Kyle's life. He sat in economy class, staring out the window at clouds, running through scenarios in his head. None of them ended well. Kira was 13 years old. She'd been conditioned for months to believe he was dangerous, possibly violent. She might not even want to come home with him. She might fight him, scream for help, believe she was being kidnapped by the father who'd spent 13 years loving her. But she was his daughter. That was the only thing that mattered. The lawyer, Fernando Ruiz, met Kyle at Juan Santa Maria International Airport. He was younger than Kyle had expected, maybe 35, but his handshake was firm and his English was perfect. Your wife is claiming asylum, Ruiz explained as they drove through San Jose toward the city center. She says you're abusive, that she's protecting your daughter from domestic violence. She has no evidence of that. She has medical records, police reports, witness statements. Ruiz glanced at Kyle while they waited at a red light. All very convincing, if they're real. Kyle handed him the folder he'd prepared during the flight. They're not real. I have proof. Ruiz studied the documents while they sat in traffic, his expression growing more serious with each page. This changes things. But the court system here can be complex. How complex? Corruption is a problem. Money helps, but truth helps more. Ruiz looked at Kyle directly. Are you prepared to fight for this? Really fight? Because your wife isn't going to give up easily. Kyle thought of Kira, scared and confused in some temporary shelter, believing her father was a monster who wanted to hurt her. Whatever it takes. Then we start tomorrow. But Kyle, your daughter has been told you're dangerous. She may not want to see you. Kyle stared out at the unfamiliar city, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the foreign world where his daughter was being held. Then I'll have to prove her wrong. The children's shelter sat behind concrete walls topped with razor wire, like a prison designed to keep the world out instead of keeping people in. Kyle's hands were steady as he signed the visitor forms, but his heart felt like it might explode from the pressure building in his chest. The guard who escorted him through the facility was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much human suffering. She led him through a maze of corridors painted in cheerful colors that couldn't quite hide the institutional smell of disinfectant and despair. She's been very quiet, the guard said in accented English. Cooperative, but withdrawn. The trauma counselor says this is normal for children in her situation. Kyle wanted to ask what exactly the counselor thought Kira's situation was, but he kept quiet. He'd learned patience in the Marines, and he would need all of it now. The visiting room was small and sterile, with plastic chairs arranged around metal tables bolted to the floor. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Kyle chose a table near the window, where natural sunlight could at least soften the edges. When the door opened and Kira walked in, Kyle's heart nearly stopped. She looked smaller than he remembered, like she'd shrunk into herself. Her hair was longer, hanging loose around her face instead of pulled back in the ponytail she usually wore. Her clothes were two big, donated items from the shelter, probably, and she moved with the careful posture of someone who'd learned not to draw attention. When she saw him, she stopped dead in the doorway. "Dad!" The word came out like a question, as if she wasn't sure he was really there. As if she wasn't sure she wanted him to be. Kyle stayed seated, hands folded on the table between them. Every instinct screamed at him to rush to her, to hold her until this nightmare ended. Instead, he kept his voice steady and calm. "Hello, sweetheart." Kira moved slowly to the chair across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. She sat down like she might need to run at any moment. "How did you find me?" "I never stopped looking." Kyle studied his daughter's face, noting the changes 3 months had made. She was thinner, more serious. The easy smile he remembered was nowhere to be seen. "Are you okay? Are they treating you well here?" Kira nodded but didn't speak. The silence stretched between them like a gulf. "Mom said you were." She stopped, looking away. "She said you didn't want me anymore." The words hit Kyle like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. "What else did she tell you?" "That you were angry all the time. That you wanted to control me." Kira's voice got smaller. "That you might hurt us if we didn't do what you wanted." Kyle pulled out his phone and placed it on the table between them. "I want you to listen to something." He played one of the recordings he'd found, Kaylee's voice filling the small room as she slowly poisoned their daughter against him. Kira's face went white as she listened to her mother's patient manipulation. That's not how it happened," Kira whispered. "Keep listening." Kyle played more recordings, each one showing another layer of Kaylee's deception. The careful lies, the twisted memories, the months of psychological preparation for this moment. "She said we had to leave because you were dangerous," Kira said, tears starting to stream down her face. "She said you tried to take me away from her." "Look at me, Kira." Kyle's voice was gentle but firm. "Have I ever hurt you? In 13 years, have I ever laid a hand on you in anger?" Kira shook her head, unable to speak. "Have I ever tried to control you? Or have I tried to teach you to make good decisions?" "Teach me," she whispered. "And when you made mistakes, what did I do?" You helped me fix them. You never gave up on me." Kyle reached across the table, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. "Your mother lied to you about who I am. She used real moments, real memories, and twisted them into something ugly." His voice was steady, but Kira could hear the pain underneath. "She needed you to be afraid of me, so you'd go with her willingly." "Why?" Kira's voice broke on the word. "Why would she do that?" Kyle thought about the answer carefully. Kira deserved honesty, but she was still just 13 years old, because she wanted a different life than the one we had, and she was willing to destroy our family to get it. They sat in silence for several minutes, Kira processing everything she'd heard while Kyle waited for her to speak. "I want to go home," she said finally to Kyle's chest loosened for the first time in months. "That's what I'm here to do. Can we really go home? Or will they make me stay here?" Kyle looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the fear that had been living in her eyes for months. Not fear of him, but fear that nothing would ever be safe or certain again. "I promise you, we're going home. Together." The call came from Fernando Ruiz at midnight, jolting Kyle awake in his hotel room. He'd been dreaming about Kira, about taking her fishing like they used to do on Saturday mornings before the world turned upside down. "The court was going to rule in your wife's favor tomorrow," Ruiz said without preamble. Her documentation looked legitimate, and the asylum claim was compelling. Kyle sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What do you mean was going to—" "Something changed tonight. Your wife's accomplice in Portland, Chase Moran, he contacted Costa Rican authorities directly through his lawyer. He's provided evidence that your wife committed fraud and kidnapping." Kyle felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Why would he do that? He's trying to avoid criminal charges in the United States. Apparently, the FBI started investigating his company's financial records after you confronted him. He's willing to testify against your wife in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Kyle thought of Chase Moran, shaking in that parking garage, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face pale with fear. The man was exactly as pathetic as Kyle had thought. What evidence? Bank records showing payments for fake documentation. Communication logs between his personal email and your wife's accounts. Video surveillance from his office showing your wife planning the kidnapping. Ruiz paused, and Kyle could hear papers rustling in the background. There's also testimony from the boat captain who transported them, Rick Carver. Apparently, he's decided to cooperate rather than face accessory charges. Kyle closed his eyes, feeling the weight of months of pressure finally beginning to lift. So, it's over. The criminal case against your wife is solid. But Kyle, there's something else. The court requires a psychological evaluation of your daughter before releasing her to your custody. Standard procedure in international custody disputes. What kind of evaluation? A qualified psychologist will interview Kira to assess whether she's been psychologically manipulated and whether she truly wants to return home with you. Ruiz's voice was careful. If she's been too damaged by her mother's lies, if she's genuinely afraid of you, then they won't let me take her home. The court's primary concern is the child's welfare. If Kira expresses fear or reluctance, she won't. Kyle's voice was certain. I showed her the recordings. She knows the truth now. I hope you're right. Because tomorrow, everything depends on what your daughter says in that room. The next morning, Kyle watched Kaylee being led into the courtroom in handcuffs. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the harsh fluorescent lighting. When she saw Kyle sitting in the gallery, something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or fear. She'd expected him to break, to give up, to accept that his family was gone. She'd forgotten what he was made of. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Isabel Vargas, methodically presented the evidence. The forged documents, the stolen money, the fake medical records claiming abuse that had never happened. Mrs. Vanett, Prosecutor Vargas said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, you have committed elaborate fraud spanning multiple countries and involving the kidnapping of a minor child. Kaylee's lawyer, a nervous young man who kept adjusting his glasses, tried to maintain the abuse narrative. My client was protecting her daughter from a dangerous situation. There is no evidence of domestic violence in the Vanett household, Vargas interrupted. No police reports, no medical records, no testimony from teachers or neighbors. What we do have is evidence of months of premeditation by Mrs. Vanett to steal her daughter and destroy her husband's reputation. Kyle watched his wife's face as her carefully constructed lies were dismantled piece by piece. Kaylee kept glancing at him, as if she couldn't believe he was really there, as if she couldn't believe he'd tracked her across 2 countries and through layers of false identity. When Kira took the stand, the courtroom went completely silent. She looked small in the witness chair, but her voice was clear and steady when she spoke. My mom told me my dad was dangerous, she said, looking directly at the judge. She showed me recordings of him being angry and told me stories about times when he'd been mean to me. But when I heard the recordings my dad played for me yesterday, I realized she'd been lying. The prosecutor leaned forward. Can you explain what you mean by that? The angry moments she recorded, they were real. But she didn't include the parts where he explained why he was disappointed or how he helped me do better next time. She made it sound like he hated me, but he doesn't. He never did. Kira's voice broke slightly, but she continued. My mom taught me how to lie. My dad showed me the truth. Kyle had to close his eyes against the pain in his daughter's voice. When he opened them, Kira was looking right at him, and there was something else there. Something that looked like forgiveness. The judge's verdict was swift. Kidnapping in the first degree, with a sentence of 20 years. Fraud charges that would add another 10 years to run concurrently. Kaylee would be eligible for parole in 15 years. When Kira was 28 years old, Kyle felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no anger. Just emptiness where all that emotion used to be. As they led Kaylee away, she looked back at him one last time. Kyle stared back without expression, giving her nothing. No forgiveness, no anger, no acknowledgement that she had ever meant anything to him. She was a stranger who had stolen his daughter. Now she was paying the price. The flight back to Portland felt like a journey between 2 different worlds. Kyle sat next to Kira, watching her stare out the window at clouds and ocean, processing everything that had happened in the past 4 days. Are you angry at me? She asked as they flew over the California coast. Kyle looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She was 13 years old and had been through more trauma than most adults experienced in a lifetime. She'd been manipulated by the person she trusted most, forced to flee her home, and held in a foreign country by people who didn't understand her situation. For what? For believing her. For going with her. Kira's voice was small. For not figuring out she was lying. Kyle reached over and took her hand. You were a child. She was your mother. You did what children do. You trusted the person who was supposed to protect you. But I should have known. No. Kyle's voice was firm but gentle. She spent months poisoning you against me. Using real moments, real mistakes I made as your father, and turning them into weapons. That's not your fault, Kira. That's hers. They sat in silence for a while, the plane engines humming around them. Then Kira said, what happens now? Now we go home. We rebuild. We figure out how to trust each other again. We'll be the same as before. Kyle considered the question seriously. No, it won't be the same. We're both different now. But different doesn't have to mean worse. I'm scared, Kira admitted. Of what? That I won't know how to be your daughter anymore. That I won't remember how we used to be together. Kyle squeezed her hand. We'll figure it out. Day by day, just like we always have. Back in Astoria, Kyle's workshop smelled the same as always. Motor oil and metal shavings. Tools in their proper places. But everything else felt different. Kira sat at his workbench, reading while he fixed an engine. But the book was different, something about marine biology instead of the fantasy novel she used to love. They went to therapy together twice a week. Dr. Martinez was patient, professional, good at helping them find words for things that felt too big for language. She helped Kyle understand the depth of psychological manipulation Kira had endured, and she helped Kira process the betrayal by the person she'd trusted most. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Martinez told them during one session. Some days will be better than others. Some days the anger will be overwhelming, and some days the sadness will feel bottomless. That's normal. Kyle learned to read the signs when Kira was having a bad day. The way she'd retreat to her room, or the careful way she'd watch him when he was frustrated about work. She was still learning to trust that his emotions weren't dangerous, that disappointment didn't equal rejection. Kira learned to talk about her feelings instead of hiding them. She learned to ask questions when something didn't make sense, instead of assuming the worst. She learned that love could be steady and reliable, not just manipulative and conditional. Do you think she ever loved us? Kira asked one afternoon. They were walking on the beach, gray waves rolling endlessly toward shore, seagulls crying overhead. Kyle picked up a piece of driftwood, smooth from years of waves. He considered the question seriously, the way he always did when Kira asked something important. I think she loved the idea of us. The perfect family. The simple life. He threw the driftwood into the surf and watched it disappear. But love isn't just a feeling, Kira. It's a choice. Every day, you choose to put someone else's needs before your own. Your mother stopped making that choice. When? I don't know. Maybe gradually, over years. Maybe all at once when she met Chase Moran and saw a different kind of life. Kyle looked at his daughter, noting how much she'd grown in just 6 months. But it doesn't matter when. What matters is that we choose differently. They walked in silence for a while, collecting shells and watching the waves. Then Kira said, "Will it ever stop hurting?" Kyle looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 13 years old, and already carrying scars that would never fully heal. But she was strong. Stronger than he'd been at her age. Stronger than he'd imagined possible. "No," he said honestly. "But now it won't control you. Or me." Late at night, when Kira was asleep and the house was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows, Kyle sat in his workshop with an envelope in his hands. He'd been carrying it for weeks, unsure what to do with it. The envelope was addressed to Kaylee at the Oregon State Penitentiary, where she would spend the next 15 years paying for her crimes. Inside was their wedding photo, the one where they both looked impossibly young and happy, standing on the beach where they just promised to love each other forever. There was also her engagement ring, the small diamond he'd saved for 6 months to buy when he was 23 and still believed that love could conquer anything. And there was a note, written in Kyle's careful handwriting. "You thought I'd break. You thought I'd give up. You thought I'd forget what mattered. You forgot what I'm made of." Kyle held the envelope over a metal trash can and lit one corner with his lighter. The paper caught quickly, flames eating through their wedding photo, through the ring that had once meant forever, through words she would never read. He watched until there was nothing left, but ash. Then he turned off the workshop lights and walked back to the house where his daughter was sleeping safely in her own bed. Kira was at the kitchen table when he came in, working on homework by the light of the overhead fixture. She looked up when she heard him. "Dad, you okay?" Kyle poured himself a glass of water and sat down across from her. Outside, rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, the sound that had defined their lives in this gray coastal town. "Yeah," he said, and for the first time in months, that was completely true. "I'm okay." Kira smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since they'd come home. "Good, because I am too." They sat together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, rebuilding something that couldn't be stolen or destroyed or faked. Something real.